Hello everyone, welcome to this session on online services licensing. Like with the product licensing sessions that we've done in the past weeks, we have decided to split it up into two parts this year because the sessions last year were deemed to be a bit long. So welcome to the first session that we want to cover today. I hope you'll enjoy this content. Please ask questions if you have any. Do let us know if you're missing anything, if we've gone over a topic too quickly. We always want to strive to make better content, so your feedback is greatly appreciated on this. Now again, follow us online. All our content is to be found on our YouTube channel. We will make sure that if new content is available, that we release it there first. And any trainings that we do are there, but also the snippets from the training. So if you're looking for something specific, you can probably find it by searching our YouTube channel. Now, today we will cover the cloud licensing basics. And the first session, so this week, we will cover Microsoft 365, and we will save the other aspects of cloud licensing like Dynamics 365, Microsoft Azure, and Microsoft Power Platform for next week. So do look out for that one as well. If you have any questions on those topics, please save them for me for next time. And let's talk about Microsoft 365 today. So just a general introduction. Microsoft Cloud licensing is very complex. I cannot stress this enough. It's very, very different from other licensing that Microsoft has for products that we covered in the past weeks. And it's the main focus for Microsoft. So what we see in the market is that generally a lot of companies that are switching to the Microsoft Cloud have trouble understanding the Microsoft Cloud licensing portfolio and the differences to the old school product licensing. It is ramping up quickly. You see cloud licensing being positioned anywhere in the world where Microsoft is active and they're able to sell this. They want to move to subscription-based licensing. They initially didn't care if you started using it or not, but the Microsoft sales representatives were just being recognized on cloud sales. Right now they're also being challenged on adoption, so that's a good thing. So they generally want to make sure that you get the value from the Microsoft Cloud, because this was a main issue for Microsoft in the past years, not so much right now anymore, but a few years ago, where they were being challenged by the market upon releasing their sales figures. Okay, but how much of the cloud that you're selling is actually being used? Well, that wasn't a high number, so they started focusing more on the adoption. So it's ramping up nicely, and you see it in their annual figures. It keeps growing double digits, between 10 and 20%, I believe, or even 30% year over year. And every quarter you see these massive numbers from the cloud growth coming out. The old way of on-premise licensing was the status quo. It's still being actively positioned, especially in certain markets where cloud obviously isn't that big yet, and that isn't able to adopt the Microsoft Cloud yet. But what you see in cloud adopted countries is that the main focus for on-premises licensing lies with the server backend, so Windows Server, SQL Server, DevTools, etc. But they also obviously want to move that towards Azure. So there's quite a lot going on right now in the Microsoft market. It's been around for a while. So when I started at Microsoft back in, I think, 2011, we had something called BPOS, which is now Office 365. They were starting with Azure. It was just the ability to have to run some virtual machines to see if you can put some applications on top of that. But it's been evolving, and it's now turned into this massive thing. And the fact that they keep changing their licensing models doesn't help with that. So in the past 5, 6, 7 years, I've seen maybe 3 or 4 models for Dynamics 365. I assume they're probably working on a new one there as well. And they keep releasing new products that have specific licensing requirements. For instance, what we will cover as well today is Windows 365, one of the latest and greatest. They just approach it in a very different way. So cloud is all about buying upfront and then being able to assign it to your users. Whereas in the on-premises world, it was more of a trust model. Microsoft trusted you to buy the licenses that you needed. If they didn't, they would audit you, something that they're doing less and less and less these days. So there's a lot going on, and having a mix of on-prem and cloud, for instance, is very, very difficult as well to maintain and manage, especially for software asset managers. So what is important to understand? With cloud subscription licensing, you get a lot of rights for on-premises use. We will cover and touch on that quite a bit in this presentation as well. Business as usual is often possible by licensing cloud subscriptions, and what I mean by that is that you don't generally need to switch immediately to the cloud. You have time to do the migration properly and still be able to keep doing what you're doing and how you're doing it without immediately needing to switch. Don't immediately dive head first into the cloud subscriptions. So don't switch everything in one go and be like, okay, that's probably the best for me right now. It's very important to understand what you need. And we talk about this a lot in our negotiation sessions that we will continue to do and update and give you more information as Microsoft evolves as well. That preparation is key. Figuring out what you need is key. Understanding how to license this is key. So all that preparation that you need to have done, we will give you a guide to do this optimally. We help clients to create these overviews as well. So if you're interested in this, do reach out to us. We can have a free consultancy call to see where you are now. If you have an idea on where you want to go, what you need to look out for. We do this quite a lot. Just talk through a contract for about an hour. See what you have, where you might be able to optimize, what you might be able to touch on to be optimally license your estate, so to say. So if this is interesting to you, come into contact with me, Eric or Dennis, and we can set something up. Now, focusing on M365 and why, I think I didn't explain why today, but this first slide will tell you anything you need to know. A lot of the M365, what you see here is an overview of all the cloud products that Microsoft currently offers. And a lot of the services are covered under the term Microsoft 365. So Office 365 services, Intune online services, Defender advanced threat protection services, Microsoft threat protection services. Those are all covered under the umbrella of Microsoft 365. So there's a lot of features within Microsoft 365 that you should be aware of, and that might have different ways of licensing or different suites that you need to understand how to make sense of. We will go through this today, and tied to that we will look at topics like what is in the contract, how to handle this, what is from SA pricing, what can I do if I buy cloud, can I still access on-premise servers. This might be relevant as well to Dynamics and Power Platform and even Azure, but we will use Microsoft 365 to cover these basics. Now, if we look towards Microsoft 365 and licensing online services, what you need to understand is what it all includes. So the previous slide, you saw an overview of the entire portfolio of Microsoft. What I'm showing you right now is a slimmed down version on what this actually looks like. So you have Windows 10/11 with Windows 11 just being released, which is your operating system, and you have these in different flavors. And then you have Office 365, also a suite of products that help your productivity. You can get this in different flavors as well, but it holds things like Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, your Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise. And then you have the Enterprise Mobility and Security Stack, which is, as it says, for your mobility and security features, and it covers a lot around security and compliance. And what we will talk about in more detail as well is what is Microsoft 365 as a suite. In the next session next week, we will touch on Dynamics 365, how that ties into the Power Platform and into Microsoft 365. And the underlying layer, actually, as I would like to call it, is the infrastructure which these SaaS, software as a service solutions run on, is obviously Azure, and we will definitely talk more about that in the next week's session as well. They're all licensed as user subscription licenses, USLs in short, and a license is always assigned to an individual named user, even if it's a tenant-wide service. Talk more around that as well. It's still that you need to buy the licenses for all the users. Procuring a user subscription license will grant you the access to use the online services. Generally, the rule is if you don't have a license, you can't access the service, and this is a technical limitation that Microsoft sets. So you should be able to assign a service to a named user in order for that user to be able to use that service. If it's not assigned, then that user cannot use that service. And if you have no more licenses to assign, you would first need to procure the licenses in order to assign and use them. This is all covered in more detail in our volume licensing session. So if you need to understand how cloud subscription licensing works, I do recommend you to check out that session or the snippet of that session where we talk about cloud licensing in the enterprise agreement, for instance, or the CSP program. Now, where can you buy online services? Quite a no-brainer for a lot of people maybe, but just to reiterate, there's three platforms that you generally buy on. You have the Web Direct platform, which is basically the Microsoft websites. You purchase directly on the Microsoft website and you pay upfront for a monthly or an annual period. Then there's the Cloud Solution Provider Program, or what it's called now as well as Microsoft Customer Agreement or New Commerce Experience, you give it a name. This is basically the Microsoft Partner Play, where you purchase your licenses through authorized Microsoft partners. That can be a licensing partner or a software implementer or whatever. And also here you pay upfront annually or monthly. And then finally you have the volume licensing agreements, which is like the enterprise agreement. And the enterprise agreement will allow you to purchase through Microsoft directly or through the Microsoft LSPs if you're an indirect country. And this is generally paid for upfront annually, or if you buy in an active term, it's prorated for the remainder of the year. Now, MCA is becoming quite a hot topic. We will do a deep dive on what is the Microsoft Customer Agreement, what we think will happen there, if it's a replacement for the Enterprise Agreement in the long run, yes or no, because there's some serious doubts there. So we will cover this in a separate session. So we will not stand still on the MCA right now, but towards the future, in the coming months even maybe, things might change a lot, and we will definitely step into and show our vision and ideas around this topic. Now, in order to understand Microsoft, it's important to understand Microsoft Enterprise Online Services. So Microsoft has two labels for their cloud solutions. and that is either an enterprise online service or an additional online service. And why is this important? Well, that's mainly to do with the enterprise agreement, but it will show you where the main focus of Microsoft is as well. So an enterprise online service is basically a product that Microsoft likes you to standardize on for your entire enterprise. So if you choose this in your EA, generally you would purchase an enterprise online service for your entire workforce, so to say. And this is mainly to do around the modern workplace. So what you see on the left hand side is the enterprise online services that we know of, and it starts with Microsoft 365 E3 and E5. That's the general suite that Microsoft offers, and it's actually a suite of suites, because what is included in it, included is Microsoft 365 E3 and E5, Enterprise Mobility and Security E3 and E5, which covers all kinds of products like Azure Active Directory Premium P1, Microsoft Intune, you name it. There's a lot of security features in there that you might want or need. Then there's the Office 365 E3 or E5 suites covering the productivity side, so anything from Exchange Online, SharePoint Online in E3 to phone system or Teams voice capabilities, and additional security features like Defender for Office 365 and E5 suite. And then you have the Windows E3, which is basically your operating system, and you have Windows E5, which is additional security features like Defender for Endpoint. So all these suites have different variations, E3 and E5, and the main difference there is the functionality and the components that are included. And like I said, if you license this in an EA, you would have to commit a minimum of 500 users for this CR volume licensing training. And that is why they have the connotation of enterprise online services, because if you choose one of these products, that will be the base for your standardization. As I said, you don't necessarily have to do it for your entire enterprise, but you may, or you probably will, but at least you have to start with 500. And then based on the amount of these enterprise online services that you bring into your enterprise agreement, your price level A, B, C, or D will be based on the type of product that you buy. More on this again in our volume licensing training. And then you might think, well, what if I buy Microsoft 365 E3 and I want to move to the E5 version? Is that possible? That's definitely possible. There's a lot of things in the middle as well, because you have these things called step-up licenses. And step-up licenses are basically what it says in the name. You are able to step up from a lower level suite to a higher level suite. So you can step up the Office 365 E3 suite to an E5 suite, or the Microsoft 365 E3 suite to an E5 suite, or even an Office 365 E3 suite to a Microsoft 365 E5 suite. There's all kinds of possibilities, and it's all about what you think you need. We will cover this in our negotiation sessions as well, because this is a very important aspect. Microsoft thinks that if you have E3, next step is E5. We consider there to be a lot of steps in between, where you identify what exactly you need out of Microsoft 365 E5, and you step up the components that you need, or you add the components that you need on top of your E3 subscription and save a lot of money. So I want to take some time to look into the different suites within these suites. And to do that, I used the overview that is created on the M365 Maps page. This is done by a Microsoft a modern workplace specialist, and it gives a great overview of everything you need. So check out his GitHub or go to m365maps.com, I believe, and check out all the content there. There's a lot more that I won't cover in this basic session, but you can find it on his website. So looking at Office 365 Enterprise, and there's apologize. Microsoft defines this as Office 365 and Microsoft 365 apps enables you to create, share, and collaborate from anywhere on any device with a cloud-based suite of productivity apps and services. So what you see on the left-hand side in red is Office 365 E3, and this is the basic suite where you get all the productivity applications or services. So it has Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise. You can access Office for the web. You will get Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive, Yammer, Microsoft Teams, and a lot more of other applications that might help you to be productive in your organization. Then there's the E5 suite, which adds additional features to your productivity like audio conferencing and Teams phone, but it also adds security features like Microsoft Defender for Office 365, Microsoft 365 Cloud App Security, Privileged Access Management, and it will add BI tooling like Power BI Pro for all users if you decide to buy Office 365 E5 for all users. I'm taking a slight sidestep here because I added the Defender for Endpoint P1 here in green. And why did I add it here? It needs some specific explanation. Microsoft has released Defender for Endpoint a while back, and they decided to split it into a P1 and a P2 plan last year. Why did they do this? Because they wanted to offer basic Defender for Endpoint functionality to Microsoft 365 users. Now you would probably say, if you're knowledgeable about Microsoft, but this is part of Windows and not Office 365. I agree. And the reason I put it here is because you only get this Defender for Endpoint P1 if you buy the entire M365 E3 suite. So not if you buy Windows E3, not if you buy Office 365 E3, not if you buy the separate components of Microsoft 365, but only if and when you buy Microsoft 365 E3 will you get Defender for Endpoint P1. And I find that to be quite strange. Why? Because if I buy these components, so I buy Windows E3 and Office 365 E3, then why wouldn't I get Defender for Endpoint P1 as well? Well, you would need to pay for it separately. That's what Microsoft states. That's why I added it here, to take a little sidestep to make sure that everybody understands that Defender for Endpoint P1 is not something that you will get when you buy a Windows E3 subscription, but you will only get it when you buy Microsoft 365 E3. Now there's also an Office 365 E1 suite. It's also an enterprise service. It consists of less functionality and it is not included in any of the M365 enterprise suites, but it might fit your organization well if you don't, for instance, need Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise or any of the security features that you will get by buying Exchange Online Plan 1. Obviously, there's more differences between E1 and E3. Again, I recommend you, if that's of importance to you, to go to m365maps.com. You can pull up the matrix and you can immediately see what the differences are between Office 365 E1 and Office 365 E3. Side note here, and we talked about this in an earlier, in another session as well. There's something called tenant-wide services. And this is mainly around the security and compliance features that Microsoft has. So for instance, if you buy Microsoft Defender for Office 365 Plan 2, this is a tenant-wide service, which means that it's activated for your entire tenant. So if you buy one license and you activate Microsoft Defender for Office 365, you are out of compliance because you should have bought licenses for all your users, because you will be covered for this service by all your users. There's a very great resource from Microsoft that explains this further. It also explains if there's the possibility to scope it to a subset of users and how to do that. Do find this, as it's quite detailed information, on our YouTube channel, because it's not for this session to go into that further. Now, if we look at the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, Microsoft defines this as an intelligent mobility management and security platform. It helps protect and secure your organization and empowers your employees to work in new and flexible ways. And the light blue items, or all the items that you see on the left-hand side, are everything that is included in the EMS suite. And if you look at the blue items, those are an overview of what is included in Azure Active Directory Premium P1, light blue, and P2 in dark blue. Why is this called out explicitly? That's what you get when you buy that product, Azure Active Directory Premium. And it holds a lot of different features, and the distinction between P1 and P2 isn't quite as clear as it should be. So that's why this overview has cleared that up. And the items in green are separate products that you will get when you buy EMS. So I've noted here also what I think are some of the most noticeable services of the suite, which are multi-factor authentication, single sign-on. That's where people usually tend to start when they're going into Azure Active Directory Premium. And then you have the information protection product that helps you protect I apologize again. That helps you protect and label and classify your data, so to say. So if you have an Excel file that's highly confidential, you can flag it as confidential. People aren't able to send it out to people outside of the company, for instance. And you can put all these classifiers on it, and it holds the rights. EMS E3 holds the rights to Intune, the device and application management tool. And it gives you certain licensing rights. So what you see here is that you will get the licensing rights to use on-premise software like Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager and System Center Endpoint Protection, but also it grants you the right to use a Windows Server Client Access license to access your on-premise servers. Now, if you look towards the E5, you have Defender for Identity, Microsoft Cloud App Security, but also things like privilege identity management and risk-based conditional access that are very important products and become more and more important to many organizations. Again, watch out for tenant-wide services, especially in the E5 suite. Most of these security features are tenant-wide. Now, I didn't recreate the overview for this from M365 maps. Why not? Because basically when you buy Windows E3 or E5, it's your operating system. It says operation system. I apologize for that. It's a typo. I will change it after this session. It's your operating system that you buy. And these Windows versions are bought as user subscription licenses, and it allows you installs on up to 5 devices. E3 is the full OS experience that you might know and enjoy or not, and E5 is the additional security that you buy on top of it for your endpoints. Now, like the on-premise version that you might be used to, where you buy upgrade licenses with software assurance, these are still upgrade licenses, so you need to have a qualifying license. We talked about this in the product licensing session as well, but I've put it on the screen again to show you what that means for the user subscription licenses. Now, with most subscriptions, Microsoft doesn't give you software assurance. That's a thing for on-premise licensing only, but it will give you similar rights like software assurance, and it's called out in product terms. Again, more content on this in the product licensing basic session that we've done 2 weeks ago. Now on to something new, Windows 365. Windows 365 combines the power and security of the cloud with versatility and simplicity of the PC. From contractors and interns to software developers and industrial designers, Windows 365 enables a variety of new scenarios for the new world of work, or so Microsoft states. So what does this basically mean? Microsoft has released a Windows Cloud PC. It allows you to stream Windows desktop apps, settings, and content from the cloud to any device. So some important aspects here. According to Microsoft, all you need for this is an internet connection capable of streaming a video, so it should be available in all countries aside from China and embargo countries, where Microsoft is currently not active. But if you can stream a YouTube clip, they say that you will be able to use Windows 365. I'm very curious to hear if that's actually the case or not. So if you have any experience from a technical standpoint on this and that you want to share, do let me know. You also don't need a Windows device to connect to cloud PCs, so you can set this up and then connect to it with RDS or HTML5 capable browsers, so you can use thin clients or even macOS or whatever you're using. There's basically two editions, Business and Enterprise, and the details on that I have on the next slide. And how you should approach this is that you first choose the edition that you want and then the configuration that you need. The buying of Windows 365, currently you can do it through WebDirect, through Microsoft sales reps, or through solution providers and Microsoft partner programs. It's not generally available in CSP, but many of these software implementing parties that will help you with this are selling this through CSP, or so I've been told. And you can leverage your existing licenses if you have Windows under SA or already buying Windows E3 or E5 subscriptions. So let's dive into the differences. So on the left hand side you see Windows 365 for business. It's small and medium enterprise play. It allows you a max of 300 users. There's no minimum, so you can start with just one if you want to. You have online only management for this solution. User roles are configurable as you want, and you can Azure AD join all these devices. It supports Windows 10 and 11. And you have the option to bring your own license. So Windows Hybrid benefit is something new that is coming to play here, and it will reduce your Windows 365 price. There's a monthly outbound data cap that is listed on the screen, and that's basically it. I see another typo. It says Windows 364 Enterprise. Obviously it should be Windows 365 Enterprise. I apologize. Sometimes with making these slides it becomes quite late and you get quite tired. There's no limit of number of users. Again, you can start with one, and then for your entire enterprise up to hundreds of thousands of users if you want. You can manage this online or in a hybrid solution, and user roles are also configurable here. Azure AD joint or domain joint. Azure AD joint is still in preview, or so I've been told. So domain joint is usually the way to go. Support for Windows 10 and 11. And in the 1v virtual CPU configuration, there is no Windows 11 yet. And it requires some qualifying licenses. So you would need Windows, again a typo, apologize, Windows Enterprise licenses, you would need Microsoft Endpoint Manager licenses, and you would need Azure AD Premium Plan 1 subscriptions. So basically, you would need a Windows OS and potentially an EMS suite to be able to use it. You can connect to Azure VNet or have a monthly outbound data cap. It's a Microsoft managed desktop. You have custom Windows images that you can use, and it uses also what Microsoft states is that it can use any app that you have built. And it has universal print integration, which is a solution that Microsoft has, I think, even purchased. Now, once you select your business or enterprise solution, you have configurations to choose from. So you basically need to select what type of processor you want, and then you have the option to select the amount of memory and the amount of storage that you need. So if you need Windows 365 configuration with one virtual CPU, all you can get is 2 gigabytes of memory and 64 gigabytes of storage. If you have 2 vCPU, you have the option to buy 4 or 8 gigabytes of memory and a lot of different options for your storage. And for 4 and 8 CPU, you see on the screen as well what the options are and what type of storage and memory you can buy. Now, to caveat all this, I have seen pricing for this and it's a very expensive solution. So I'm very curious to see towards the future what Microsoft will do with this solution, if they cut the prices, if they find ways to do this cheaper. But the bring your own license part with Windows Hybrid benefit will reduce your cost. So that's already a nice step in the right direction to reduce the price. But if you're, for instance, a company that is interested in this, but you don't have your Windows licenses yet, it might even make sense that you buy some Windows qualifying licenses, some upgrade licenses or some E3 or E5 subscriptions, and then look into this solution with a bring your own license option included. So I'm very interested to see how this progresses towards the future. What you see in the market right now is that people tend to favor Azure Virtual Desktop over Windows 365. It's a bit more, difficult to implement Azure Virtual Desktop. I'm not a technical guy, but I've been told. And this is an out-of-the-box solution, so that says something for this solution. But because Azure Virtual Desktop is a lot cheaper, people tend to gravitate towards that solution for now. Now, I want to take some time to explain how last week's sessions on on-premises licensing tie into cloud subscription licensing. And for that, I have created this overview. So on the left-hand side, you see a Pro or Enterprise, a representation of a Pro or an Enterprise desktop, which is the on-premises version. Or licensing of what you can consider Microsoft 365. And there is a way that you move from one to the other, but there's a lot of different options to do this as well. So basically, if you look at the Enterprise or Pro desktop version, you see the CoreCal and the eCal suite. And the CoreCal and the eCal suite, as you might know, are the licenses that you need to access the server environments that you have on-premise. Now, part of these are for productivity workloads, and part of these are for security workloads or System Center, or to access just a bare Windows Server environment. Now, Microsoft has split up the productivity part of the Core and the eCal suite into Office 365 E3, and the Windows Server and the System Center part into Enterprise Mobility and Security E3, as you might have seen. Office Professional Plus translates to the Microsoft 365 apps for Enterprise, and that is included in the Office 365 E3 subscription as well. And Windows is perhaps the easiest one, where you would buy Windows upgrade device licenses with software assurance. That has been translated to Windows E3 per user. So what you see here is that they don't overlap one-to-one. So there's differences in moving from on-prem to cloud. You can't just say, I have a CoreCal now, I am going to buy Enterprise Mobility, because you will miss out on the productivity section in Office 365. And there, as I said, are many different ways to translate the one to the other. Now, what's important to understand here, we will go into this in the future slides, is CAL equivalent rights. So you might just say, okay, I have a Pro and Enterprise desktop, I will move to Microsoft 365, and you will get certain use rights within Microsoft 365 that would allow you to simulate or keep using your on-premise services like a Pro or Enterprise desktop the way you were used to it. To find your ideal license configuration, we can always help you. So if you don't want to move to Office 365, but you are interested in the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, there's options there as well. These are quite nitty-gritty and go into a lot of detail. So if there's interest in this, please do let us know and drop a comment, for instance, so we might be able to cover this in some more detail. If you ever heard of Bridge CAL licensing, it's a headache, but it still exists. it might be a solution for your situation, but it goes too far to cover that in this session. Now, we've talked about the Microsoft 365 suites, and on the left-hand side you see an overview of the product terms. Microsoft loves to license suites because they can give you a nice suite-based discount, and you will probably buy a lot of services which you might not even use all in all, but they hope and they feel and see this as a way to tie into the organization and potentially cover that in and towards the future. Microsoft has display now where they say you need to buy Microsoft 365 E5. Security and compliance is very important to us, and we feel the need to explain to you why you should buy this suite of products from us. And we are here to tell you that's generally not true. E3 is very good to cover what you are doing or used to been doing on premise. And if you need additional security compliance features, you can just add components on top of this before moving to the entire E5 suite. Again, they want to sell you the Rolls Royce of the Microsoft licensing, which is the Microsoft 365 E5, but you should always be prepared and know what you need. Don't over-license, not even when the price is very attractive. And you can quite easily calculate a break-even point of when the suite might be more cost-optimal to licensing components. This also holds true for Microsoft 365 E3, but you will, in these days, probably take a lot of value from the E3 suite with all its different productivity components. A small sidestep here, because with Microsoft, it wouldn't be Microsoft if they were to think of suites that are available for people that work out in the field as well. They want to cover in all aspects of your organization. So what they have done is created a Microsoft 365 first line suite, and the first line suite is for specific or frontline. First line, front line, the name changes. I'm sometimes lost as well, but it's called the Microsoft 365 F3 suite, and it's for specific user scenarios. And if you cover one of the following aspects, you might be able to license an F3 suite. And that is if you use a primary work device with a single screen smaller than 10.1 inch. This excludes iPads. They've done that very sneakily. Or you have a shared device with other qualifying Microsoft 365 or Office 365 first line worker users like shift workers. So either of these qualify for you, then you might have the ability to license a frontline or an F3 suite license. I always translate this that the F3 or the F1 suite that we cover in the next slide is available for blue collar workers and non-desk employees. So if you're out in the field, for instance, you're a construction company and you have all these people working out on a building site, then this might make sense to you. And what is included in the F3 suite is Office 365 F3. It's a very slimmed down version of the Enterprise suite, where you get some basic access to SharePoint and Exchange and OneDrive, but you have also some of these other tools that might help you do your work, like Yammer, Sway, some Power Automate options and Power Apps options if you create apps for this that they need to access. There's Enterprise Mobility and Security E3 included. And basically that's to allow you to do the security features for your frontline workers as well. And then there's Windows 10 or 11 E3 license included as well. There's some caveats and limitations that you see on the screen as well, but specific to F3, you have the rights to use Windows 10 Enterprise LTSC. You do not have the right to use LTSC. You have the rights to install and use MDOC. Do not have the rights to use and install MDOC. I'm sorry, don't know what's going on right now. Other than the use of Windows Virtual Desktop, rights to access and use virtualized instances of Windows only apply to licensed users of a shared device with a qualifying operating system. Now that's a very mouthful, but what I see in the market is that generally, if you license these suites, it's not because you need Windows 10 for your users, but it's mainly around the Office 365 F3 part and the Enterprise Mobility and Security E3 part to have your users have secure devices and connect to your environments in a secure fashion through Azure Active Directory Premium Plan 1. Now there's also an F1 that doesn't hold the Windows desktop OS, and it has an even slimmer version of Microsoft Office 365 included, where you still will get SharePoint access. You have Microsoft Teams included. You can read Office documents on the web, and you have Yammer and some other items. What you see immediately is there's no Exchange here. You might get an Exchange license with it, but you can't use it, and the very simple reason that Microsoft states that they will give it to you in your F1 license is because they need this for Teams functionality. See the note that I have put on the right bottom side. There's EMS included, so this is a very good suite if you need your frontline workers to access a device that is in your IT environment to execute certain tasks, look up documents, read documents, do time management, whatever they need to do. You can offer this suite to them, and they will be able to connect securely to a managed device. And do whatever they need to do. Now, final note here is that there's also additional security and compliance features that you can add to this. Microsoft calls this the F5 Security and Compliance Suite. They're available separately as well, and they will include similar functionality to the security and compliance suites that are included in E5. More on this in our Microsoft 365 deep dive that we will be hosting again this year as well. Do find that on our YouTube channel for the last year's session. And if you're interested in the newer version, look on our LinkedIn. There's a pinned post where you can find the deep dive and when that date is set. Now, looking at the enterprise agreement contract in regards to online services, I wanted to cover some of the topics that are in there. So what is in the EA from the enterprise enrollment, talked about before, but enterprise only services, enterprise online services only. If no enterprise product is ordered, then enrolled affiliate need only maintain at least 500 subscription licenses for enterprise online services. What this means and states is, if you are buying only enterprise online services, so Microsoft 365 E3 or any of the suites within that suite that count as enterprise online services, you do not need to license for your entire organization, but you can just start with 500 seats. This is something that people quite often overlook. So you don't need to purchase immediately for your entire organization. You can start small and grow into it if you want as well. There are certain situations in which this might make sense. For instance, we recently helped a hospital where this was of interest. They started their journey into the cloud, and they went from a contract where they had Windows only in their EA to a Microsoft 365 EA, where they bought E3 for their knowledge workers, their board of directors, and people that are in need of a full modern workplace, and they bought the F3 Microsoft 365 F3 licenses for their personnel, like people that share devices like nurses, etc. Online services For online services identified as eligible for true-up in the product terms, an affiliate may place a reservation order for additional license prior to use, and payment may be deferred until the next true-up year order. So what we cover in the volume licensing session as well is the term license reservation. And to reiterate that here, online services should be procured in order to have access, and this holds true for adding licenses of certain services. No license, no possibility for assignment. Now, what that states here with the license reservation clause is that it doesn't mean that you have to create a purchase order in advance when you need additional licenses for new users that you bring into your company. You can do it in two ways. Either you create that purchase order and you buy it up front and you will get invoiced immediately, or you have the process of online service reservation, where you go into the volume licensing service center. You say, I need to have access to another 100 licenses for Microsoft 365 E3. It will reserve the licenses, it will add them to your Microsoft 365 admin center, and you will not need to pay any of these licenses until your next true-up period, so 30 to 60 days in advance of your Microsoft Enterprise Agreement anniversary date, where you will need to consolidate all the reservations that you've done. And that means that you will pay for the period that you started reserving it and the full months after it. And looking forward, you will consolidate them into a new order for the next year as well. Need more info? Again, check our volume licensing series where we cover this in full detail. Subscription license reductions. So in the enterprise online services part of this presentation, I talked about the distinction between an enterprise online service and an additional online service. And that's important here as well to understand what that difference is, because it's handled differently by Microsoft. So you may reduce the quantity of subscription licenses at the enrollment anniversary date on a prospective basis if permitted in the product terms. And then Microsoft states that you can do it as follows. For subscription licenses that are part of an enterprise-wide purchase, licenses may be reduced if the total quantity of licenses and software assurance for an applicable group meets or exceeds the quantity of qualified devices or qualified users identified on the product selection form, and includes any additional qualified devices and qualified users added in any prior or true-up orders. So if you have started an EA, what this says is if you started an EA with, for instance, 2,000 users, you've grown to 2,400, but in the period after that, you again went down to, let's say, 1,900 users. What you can do is reduce the 2,400 back to the initial starting point of 2,000. And this is when you have licenses with software assurance as well, so enterprise products like Windows E3 with software assurance, for instance. If you have enterprise online services in a given pool that are not part of an enterprise-wide purchase, which we talked about in the previous slide, license can be reduced as long as the initial order minimum requirements are maintained. And this is that 500 user minimum. So if you have, again, a contract with 2,400 users and you bought another 200, so you're at 2,600 users, but the next year you decide to do not want to have anything to do anymore with Microsoft 365, you still have an active contract, but you can reduce that total to 500. So you should and can't probably should try obviously, but you can't probably terminate your contract with Microsoft. So what you can do is reduce back to 500. For anything that isn't an enterprise online service, that's typically an additional online service. You can always reduce upon your anniversary date to a total of 0. So if you buy, for instance, let me take an example, Teams phone for all your users, you start and you're very happily implementing it, and you figure out that in the end that isn't the solution that you want to have for your services, and you go into a different PBX provider, then at your anniversary you can reduce all your Teams phone licenses down to 0, and your subscription licenses will be cancelled in total. So again, on the right hand side, I list all the enterprise online services, and if you have these included in your enterprise agreement without any software assurance enterprise products with it, you can reduce to 500. If you have software assurance licenses included, like the Core Windows device licenses or Office Pro Plus without the 365, but for 365 Pro Plus it used to count as well, then you are only able to reduce to the amount that you started the contract with. So you can only take out the growth that you had over the term. And if you have any additional online services, you're always able to cancel them by reducing the amount to 0. Extended term, it's an important aspect, and I won't read the entire entry in the enterprise enrollment, but it's important for a couple of reasons. If you renew under a new name or with a new company, so you have been acquired or you have changed your name of your company, Microsoft might not see this as a renewal, and they might set up a new contract for you, which means that your expired old contract will not be terminated correctly, and it will go into extended term. What is extended term? Extended term is where Microsoft will keep all your online services online for you, and they will bill you on a month-to-month basis with the then current price list price. So if you don't execute your enterprise agreement correctly at the end of your term, it might be that you will incur additional charges because Microsoft says, well, you didn't renew. We've not seen you renew. We haven't tied your expired contract to a new contract, so we will keep the online services alive for you, and we have the right to invoice you on a month-to-month basis. That might happen when you are in a merger or an acquisition. It's also the case when you discontinue cloud services and go back on-prem, for instance, or if you are still negotiating with Microsoft, or that you just decided, I don't want to have anything to do with Microsoft anymore, I will not renew my enterprise agreement in its entirety. So always check and be aware of extended term status with Microsoft. We suggest to do this always when your renewal is up. Check if extended term is on. If so, that might help you in your negotiations as well, but more on that in our negotiation sessions. But it will be something that you need to be aware of. If this is true and you go outside of your current contract term and you're still negotiating with Microsoft, don't worry, they will invoice you, but they will cancel those invoices to keep the services alive. But you will be able to cancel those invoices when you retroactively put in place your new contract. A little bit about the product terms. It's always very good to check all the online services entries in the product terms. It used to be a separate document called the online services terms, but now it's just the product terms. It's a dynamic website. It changes month over month, and the product term is it basically governs the use rights for the online services that Microsoft has. If you have an enterprise agreement, the PT, the product term version, in effect is the one that's released at the date of signing the EA. If there's more restrictive clauses that are released later that do not count for you, if there's better clauses, you can always choose to accept those as well. Newer products that are being added are always then in effect at the date of addition to your contract. Tied to the product terms and the online services terms is the data processing agreement. It's now a separate document, but it's referenced in the product terms, and when you sign a contract with Microsoft, you should review the product terms, especially the online services terms entries in this, and the data processing agreement in its entirety, because that's how Microsoft handles your data that you're going to put in the Microsoft Cloud. From SA pricing, I call this business as usual. It's simpler licensing. and I visualize it as such. So on the left hand side you see the image that I used before, where you move from your on-prem situation to Microsoft 365. And Microsoft has in the past done this in a variety of ways. I mentioned something like the bridge cal situation, which I won't go into here, but what they did afterwards was, if you had an active contract with a professional and enterprise desktop and you needed to move to the cloud, is that you were able to put an add-on on top of your pro and enterprise desktop or its components to activate your use of these cloud services. And you had these add-ons for M365, but also for its components, suites, and even for the products within those suites. There were some add-ons that you can choose. So if you had an active contract and you were still paying for your, or that's still the case, if you have an active contract and you're still paying for your professional enterprise desktop, you can use an add-on in your active contract to be able to access the cloud environment and move towards the cloud. Now, Microsoft, from a financial perspective, saw that there was a huge gap between the professional and enterprise desktop and the Microsoft 365 suite that they have released. So what they did was, if you had active software assurance on your licenses, they would give you a discount on Microsoft 365 E3, E5, or any of its components, which they called from SA pricing. So that's a benefit that you can get if you have active software assurance on your professional or enterprise desktop and you wanted to move to the cloud. Basically, what that price consists of is the cost of your professional or enterprise desktop, looking at it from a list price perspective, so not taking into account any discounts that you might have had, and the add-on price for moving to M365, and that would generally be the same as the from SA pricing. So this is what that looks like from perspective, visualized perspective. So you had your pro and professional enterprise desktop. You either bought or didn't buy an add-on to go to M365 or any of its components, but upon your renewal, you would be able to step into Microsoft 365 from SA pricing or any of its components from SA pricing based on what you had under software assurance, and get a 15% discount programmatically on that license. So if you don't have any of those professional enterprise desktop components on the software assurance, you would just have to buy what they call a full USL, and that would generally be 15% more expensive than the option for from SA. So this is where Microsoft actually gives you something back, where they say thank you for spending all these years and keeping all your products under software assurance. Here's a benefit for you. If you have invested in Microsoft technology in the past, buying licenses with software assurance, then you can step into from SA. What about subscription? We'll sidestep there. If you're in an enterprise agreement subscription, you should have had at least 3 years of full coverage for licenses under the Pro and Enterprise desktop in order to qualify for the From SA discount. This is the entry from the product terms around From SA. It's available for all Microsoft Online services that have an on-premises counterpart. So even things like Teams phone standard have a From SA SKU. If you had bought, for instance, a Plus Cal with software assurance, you can move to Teams phone standard against a significant programmatic discount. The Appendix C of the product terms states all From SA entitled licenses, and in the product terms you will find qualifying switches from on-premise software to their services cloud services counterpart. So definitely make sure you always check if you have a benefit to gain here. Microsoft sometimes offers you more From SA than you are entitled to. be sure to always discuss your options. So in the case that you, for instance, have licenses under SA, but you would need a significantly higher amount to cover your Microsoft 365 use, you could negotiate with Microsoft that you get more from SA entitlements. We've seen this happen quite a lot. It's something that the sales teams use to their benefit, because the 15% discount on from SA is not a discount that they have to request with their empowerment owners, but they can just easily grant this themselves. Then into dual use rights, as I call it, or CAL equivalent licensing. It's I subtitled it business as usual with simpler licensing, and you will see why in a bit. So in the product terms, there's a large table around CAL equivalent licensing, or client access license equivalent licensing. This picture shows a great deal of information that you see on the left hand side. But what it basically does is every CAL that you currently use, if you're still on premise, has an equivalent online service license. And what Microsoft grants you is the right, if you buy that online service, that you can access the on-premise service environment that you might still have. As an example, you purchased Microsoft 365 E3, and you then get the right to access all the relevant application servers for Exchange, SharePoint, and Skype for Business. And you have the rights to access Windows Server environments through the Enterprise Mobility and Security E3 license that is included in Microsoft 365 E3. You see this on the screen here. If you buy Microsoft 365 E3, here it is. These in blue are all the services that you can access on premise. So you can use Exchange Server, Standard and Enterprise, SharePoint Server, Skype for Business Server, if you still have it, but also Windows Server Standard and Data Center, and even Advanced Threat Analytics, which is being phased out, and Endpoint Configuration Manager, System Center Endpoint Protection, and even System Center Service Manager. These CAL equivalent rights are available for much more products than just Microsoft 365, so the entire Dynamics 365 platform is included in this as well. And this is what is included in the product terms. If you buy Microsoft 365 E3 or E5, you even get the option to install any number of copies of the following server software dedicated to customers' use: Exchange Server, SharePoint Server, and Skype for Business Server. And access to the above server software is exclusive to those that are assigned a Microsoft 365 E3 or E5 user subscription license. So if you are fully licensed for E3 and or E5, you don't have to pay anymore for your Exchange Server, SharePoint Server, and Skype for Business Server. You don't have to renew software assurance for these. You can just remove them and you can install any number of these application servers. Now, what happens if you don't have anything like everyone licensed with Microsoft 365 E3 or E5, and you, for instance, have Office 365 E1? Then you would need to still see if you need software assurance for Exchange and SharePoint and Skype for Business. For F3 and F1, the same. You don't have this right to access these on-premise servers, but Microsoft has a standard concession that they're able to grant you, where you would be able to get this right for your F1 and F3 users. They don't have CAL equivalency by default, so you would even have to buy the application servers in case you don't get this concession from Microsoft. Now, if we look at the expensive part of the Microsoft 365 E3 suite, that's still the Microsoft 365 Apps for Enterprise, or Office 365 Pro Plus, as it used to be called. But you do have options here as well, and specifically if you have Microsoft 365 from SA licenses. If you have these, So you moved from your on-prem software to Microsoft 365 licenses. You've been granted the from SA pricing. Then the below entry from the product terms holds true for you. So basically, it means that alongside your Microsoft 365 E3 and E5 from SA subscriptions, you have the right to use a local copy of Office Professional Plus. And that means with downgrade rights, so you can use any version of Office Pro Plus that you might need for all your E3 and E5 from SA subscribed users. And what about if you don't have from SA? Well, it depends. So if you have 0 from SA licenses in your contract, you do not have this right, and you can't use on-premise Office Pro Plus. If you do have from SA, but you also have users that are licensed for full USLs, so you have, for instance, a company where you used to be 2,000 people big, you had a Pro Desktop, you moved everything to Microsoft 365 E3 from SA, all those 2,000 users are able to use an on-prem installation of Office Pro Plus. But you've grown, and your company has grown to 3,000 users. So you've bought 3,000 full USLs to go alongside with your from SA user subscription licenses. Then those 1,000 additional full USL users also are granted this right. And they're granted this right up into the amount of from SA users that you have. So if I have 2,000 from SA, I can license up to 2,000 additional with full USL and also grant them this benefit for an on-premise installation. That is pretty sweet if you ask me. Then Windows per device and per user, you can mix and match these. I won't stand still on this for too long because we've covered mainly this a lot in the product licensing session as well. But I do want to call out some of the differences that you see on the screen here. So the license assignment for Windows Desktop operating system licenses per user and device are different, but you can mix and match them. And if you're interested in more around Windows operating system licensing, do check out our product licensing session. Now, a little bit about conclusions about dual use rights. If we've not already talked about any of these, we will discuss the why. So licensing cloud instead of on-premise can have many benefits. It's licensing made simpler because you potentially move towards buying just one suite. Though we always think that you might be able to profile your users and have 1, 2, or maybe even 3 different profiles for your employees. It's an incentive for Microsoft, so they love to sell cloud. The sales reps still are into a phase where they rather sell you cloud than on-prem because that's what they get recognized for in their sales targets. But they also, as I said in the start of this presentation, they also get recognized on adopting these services. So they will want to talk with you as well on what you're going to do with it, if they can help with the rollout, etc., etc. And if you buy these, as I've shown you with all the dual use rights that you have, you could move to the cloud at your own pace. So you can buy these licenses and you can just wait and keep doing what you're doing right now. And then just start to innovate as you see fit. So again, the focus for Microsoft is on selling cloud licenses, but you don't necessarily have to state, I do not, I will not move to the cloud. You can better tell them, I want to move, but in due time. How can I best do this? And it's even better if you use your LSP or an advising company to help you make sense of this. And find your perfect fit in cloud licenses. Don't let Microsoft persuade you into their one-size-fits-all approach. Do your due diligence on this as well. Like I said, profiling can be quite important. And as always, if you need to have a one-to-one session with us, you want to have take an hour to go through your contract and your options, we're always here to help you. Now that was it for this week. I think we've gone a bit over time. I do apologize for that. but next week I will try to keep it within the set time frame. For now, I want to thank you again. A little bit of a plug here to follow us online if you have not done so already, and definitely reach out to us in case you have any questions. I will go through the comments and the questions after the session, because I think I've taken up enough of your time right now. So it remains me to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week.